Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is Rencity, host of Sports and Shorts of Sorts, my weekly podcast that I drop, each week. And don't have enough room for the NBA stuff. I love the NBA. I have so much of it, and I've been doing these weekly recaps just to make it work so I can cover hoops. It doesn't fit in the podcast, but gives me my own freedom to do this thing on its own. This is the 12th version of it. We're 12 weeks in the NBA season. Yeah. So this is pretty much the halfway point for a lot of teams here. And before I jump into the recaps like I do each episode, I just got to give my respects to the Golden State Warriors assistant coach, Dejan Milojevic. Man, suffering a heart attack Tuesday, January 16th at a private dinner in Salt Lake City with the team. He was rushed to the hospital. Life-saving efforts. They tried everything, but he passed away. The support coming out from the basketball community from all over the globe. Milojevic, he impacted everyone. He was a beast in his native Serbia, earning the nickname Serbian Charles Barkley. After a fantastic playing career, he'd go into coaching, where he gave so much to the game, helping a lot of the big men in the NBA today, like Nikola Jokic, who learned under him, and his he's touched the game so many different ways, and he's been part of the staff. He was part of the title winning team, and Steve Kerr said how he was over the moon to have him join the team, and really puts life in perspective. This is a game, and these are people, though, and like the Warriors and their staff, whoever was at this team dinner who witnessed this heart attack, which turned into death. Like, oh, the trauma that must come with that. Like, I still remember seeing my dad pass away in front of me, and he was battling cancer, and we knew it was coming, but it was still like, I won't forget that. And this team, they're gonna have to talk to people about this to see. This coach that's been with them for a while, he becomes a friend, and to have him go like that, geez, I just feel for everyone involved. His family, his kids, just an awful experience. Puts life in perspective, and tell everyone you love him. Dejan Milojevic, 46 years old. May he rest in peace. Now, we'll go to the basketball court here. We'll go from that sadness to the court, which is what he thrived on and would like to talk about. And we'll start in the Eastern Conference. In the East, where the sun rises, like it does every day, we'll start with the Atlantic Division. Leaders of the Atlantic Division, leaders of the Eastern Conference, the Boston Celtics. They went 3-0 this past week. After getting blown out on national television there by the Bucks, they won three straight, pounding the former coach Ime Udoka. His return with the Rockets, they battered him by 32. Then they beat the Raptors before returning home and taking care of my Spurs. And I told y'all, don't worry about this Bucks loss. It was the second game of a back-to-back. After the first one went to overtime, this was a recipe for a loss, and they've bounced back, showing that they're the real contenders. And Jason Tatum continues to show that he should be in this MVP race. All the starters are averaging at least 13 points per game or higher. This is crazy. They have the best starting five in the NBA. They're ranked second in defensive rating. This team has it all, and they flex their depth a bit over the last few games here. Jaylen Brown didn't suit up against the Raptors. Porzingis didn't play against the Spurs. The Celtics won both of those. Just cycling guys out, not resting two guys the same night to avoid any fines, as the new rule specifies. But Celtics have some tough games coming up, hosting the Nuggets before going on the road to take on the Rockets. A little rematch there, the Mavs and the Heat. So those are some tough games, but I don't think the Celtics are worried about anybody on the schedule right now. They have the teams worried about them. But next in the Atlantic and third in the Eastern Conference, you got the Philadelphia 76ers. Went 3-0 this past week. They host the Kings and beat Sacramento without Joel Embiid. Tobias Harris did enough to carry the team that night in the game high 37. Embiid would return to the lineup for the next two games and drop 41 points in back-to-back games, and not against any slouches here. Embiid would go for 41 and 10 against Sengun and the Rockets before going up against Nikola Jokic and putting up 41 points, 10 dimes, and 7 boards. It's insane what Embiid does when he's on the floor. Like, I think like we'll get to that MVP race later, and I think Embiid he'd be right there near the top. The only thing going against him is that rule where you have to play a minimum 65 games. Embiid's already missed 10 games. If you do the math, if he misses 8 more games, he's out of the running for a trophy. I know he said he's got his trophy and he's worried about the team winning now, which is good. Those are all the right things, but man, when he's on the floor, he's got to be an MVP candidate. Oh man, like those numbers he put up against good players. Love it. The whole different team when he's in the lineup, and they got some tough games coming up. Play the Magic. They'll be playing the new look Pacers. We'll get in on that a little bit, and they have some easier games against the Hornets and Spurs. So I really do hope Joel Embiid suits up against Victor Wembanyama in that Spurs game. I want to see that matchup. Next up in the Atlantic, New York Knicks. They went 3-1 this past week, and they're 8-2 since acquiring OG Anunoby from the Raptors. The Knicks went into Memphis and beat an injury-riddled Grizzlies team before returning home and losing a tough one to the Magic. Then they'd play their next 2 games at home, and they'd beat a tough Rockets team before holding on to win a close one over the Wizards. The Knicks leader, Jalen Brunson, would miss the first 2 of those games I mentioned, but he dropped 30 and 41 in the ones he returned. And I mentioned the record since picking up OG Anunoby. He's fit like a glove, and his scoring has impressed a lot of people and players. He's logging up big minutes with the Knicks, as Tibbs tends to do, but that's no surprise there. He can handle it. We've seen what he's capable of in the Raptors when Nick Nurse used to ride him a lot there, but I was a little worried how the Knicks front court would hold up with Mitchell Robinson, who's having a great year, went down with that injury, but Isaiah Hartenstein, he's been one of the best rebounders this calendar year. If you look at the numbers, he's up there with the best since the changing of the calendar. Like, what he's done is phenomenal. I don't think anyone expected that out of him. We knew he's a good backup center, but he's thriving in this starting role right now. Um, Still some questions about Evan Fournier. Is he going to get moved by the deadline? And an important question brought to us by Walt Clyde Fraser, legendary broadcaster. Is Malachi Flynn the real evil version of Dante DiVincenzo? He looks like a slightly more evil looking version of him. I've seen the Waluigi memes out there, so I can see it. It's just random how he just drops that during a broadcast, but I love it. Sticking in New York, we go to the Brooklyn Nets. They've been struggling a bit. They only went 0-2 this past week, a little spaced out schedule for them, and they're currently rocking a 4-game losing streak. They lose a close one at home in overtime to the Heat. Mikal Bridges would force overtime with free throws, but he'd miss a chance at the buzzer to win the game, and then they'd follow that up by going into Portland and giving up a late lead to lose to the Blazers on a last-second bucket. This team is trying to find its identity and some kind of consistency. They're lacking both, and it's showing in this losing skid. They've been right there the last few games, but they just can't seem to finish. They need to nip those bad habits in the bud, and head coach Jacques Vaughn, he's got some work to do getting his lineups figured again. They got some people back, and you're trying to mix everyone up here, right? They're in a little bit of disarray right now, so we'll see what happens, because they're going to get caught by this next team I'm going to mention. The team in the bottom of the Atlantic Division, the Toronto Raptors. It's been a week for them. They went 1-3 this past week, but it was not your normal week. After getting blown out by the Jazz, the Raptors would return home and lose to the Celtics. And that loss would be the last time you'd see Pascal Siakam suit up for the Raptors. We heard the talk. We knew it was coming. But Pascal Siakam was sent to the Indiana Pacers for Bruce Brown, Jordan Nwora, and the 3 first-round picks. The Pelicans were also involved in this transaction, and Kira Lewis Jr. went to the Raptors in order for the deal to be completed. And the Raptors had to waive former second-round pick Christian Koloko. And then, to make news worse for Koloko, it was announced that he's suffering from a blood clot, and it could jeopardize a 23-year-old's career. So he's been referred to the league's fitness-to-play panel, and I'm hoping he can recover and get back into the league. It's a shame whenever something like that happens. 23 years old. But hours after the trade, the Raptors would host the Miami Heat, and they'd destroy them. Raptors coach Darko Rajakovic was clearly emotional. He's good friends with Warriors assistant coach Dejan Milojevic, who I mentioned at the top of the show. You could tell he was very much feeling it, and he honored his fallen compatriot by opening the game with a play he stole from Decky. He used it to start the game, and it finished with a Gary Trent 3-pointer. He said he dedicated the game to his friend, and it's very emotional. You could see it on his face. The Raptors played inspired ball because of it, and they'd go on to lose the next game to the Bulls. And they had newly acquired Bruce Brown in that game, and he looked pretty good in his first minutes in the Raptors. But the Bulls really killed the Raptors in the paint, with Vucevic and Drummond and anybody going to the hoop. There was no rim protection. We know Jakob Poeltl's got a long-term injury for the Raptors, and I mentioned those 3 first-round picks Masai picked up in the trade for Siakam here. So there's still time before the deadline. We'll see if they do more, get any more help for the interior, because like I said, they got killed in the paint against the Bulls. And I could see more teams doing that, but everywhere else they look pretty good. And it's wild. Chris Boucher is the last remaining Raptor from that 2019 championship winning team. That's crazy. The last one standing. That's wild. But yeah, Siakam, it's a bummer to see him go in Toronto. I love watching Pascal Siakam play, and he was a very important part of winning of that title coming. Everyone says how much Kawhi did, but don't forget about what Pascal did. Amazing Raptor, fantastic career, and I look forward to seeing what he does in Indiana. We'll get more to that later, and we'll get there sooner than later. We're going to the Central Division right now, but we'll start with the division-leading Milwaukee Bucks, the second seed in the Eastern Conference. Milwaukee went 2-1 this past week, beating a Curryless Warriors team, and then winning an absolute thriller of a game against the Sacramento Kings. In overtime, the Bucks were down. Brook Lopez made a 3 to make it close. Bucks would get another chance with seconds left in the extra frame. Lillard would dribble it up, pull up from the parking lot as he does as time winds down, and he'd hit the game winner. Dame time in an overtime as the Bucks took the emotional win over the Kings. And oh yeah, Giannis Antetokounmpo fucked around and got a triple-double in that game. And then the Bucks would follow that up by going into division rivals Cleveland's house, and they'd get crushed. Giannis Antetokounmpo did not suit up in that game, and it showed. The Cavs beat the Bucks by 40. Not good to be losing by 40 to anyone, yet someone in your division. I know they're missing Giannis, but yikes. But yeah, if that's showed us anything, it's how important Giannis is to this team. We know Dame is going to try to hit those clutch shots, and with Giannis getting this team deep in the playoffs, he needs that sidekick to hit big ones. And if Dame's covered Middleton, you're going to have to be that guy. It was big clutch plays by Splash Mountain, too. You love when Lopez can get his shot going. But next up in the Central is that team who crushed the Bucks this past week. I'm talking about the Cavaliers. The Cavs went 2-0 this past week. They had a bit of a spaced-out schedule as well. Excuse me, but they are also in possession of the longest winning streak in the NBA at 6 games. They pounded the Bulls before destroying the Bucks, as I just alluded to, and they've been doing this without Darius Garland and without Evan Mobley. It's crazy how they've been doing it. Donovan Mitchell continues to push for another All-Star nod, and he's showing he's one of the best scorers in the league. Jared Allen is a legitimate big man, and he owns the center position. We knew what he could do on defense, but his offensive side's been really improving. You love to see it. And the depth of this team has been flexing a bit too. We know what Karis LeVert can do. He's really skyrocketing up into that 6 Man of the Year race. But it was George Niang against the Bucks, throwing up a career-high 33 off the bench. That was impressive. So this team's the real deal. They're moving up the standings, currently 4th in the Eastern Conference. And I can only imagine them getting better once they get Mobley and Garland back. So look out for Cleveland. They're hot right now, and we'll see them in some tough Eastern matchups this coming week when they take on Atlanta, Orlando, and then back-to-back games against Milwaukee. So that'll be really interesting to see. So you know what that means? We need more talk of JB Bickerstaff for Coach of the Year. He's doing a phenomenal job. With the injuries this team has faced, we need to be talking more about JB Bickerstaff. Next in this division, Indiana Pacers. I mentioned the Pacers and the Raptors portion there for that huge trade that went down, and I love the trade, personally, for the Pacers side. I know Siakam, his contract's coming up, but Halliburton, I was always like, who's going to be the number 2 guy? Is it Miles Turner stepping up? Who's one of the bench guys? Is it going to be Mathurin? Who's our consistent guy? You're getting more than that in Pascal Siakam. I love the trade for them. I see them skyrocketing. But anyway, back to the games here. The Pacers went 2-2 this past week, and they were doing it all without Tyrese Halliburton, who's been dealing with that calf injury. or sorry, the hamstring injury. And we know the Pacers are a deep team. They were showing it off. 8 players in double figures in that win over the Hawks. 7 players in double figures in that tough loss to the Nuggets. The following night, visibly drained Pacers team would get blown out by the Jazz. Then they'd go to Sacramento and have 7 players reach double figures, including 25 from Benedict Mathurin and 20 points and 10 dimes from T.J. McConnell. Huge win over the Kings. Sorry. Again, I love the depth of this Pacers team. And it's been reported that Halliburton's progressing pretty quickly from his injury and should be able to return sooner than expected. Pacers got to wait a little bit for Pascal Siakam to make his debut. He's not going to be in the game Friday against the Blazers. So I don't know if he's going to be making his debut in Phoenix on the weekend, or maybe they'll wait till next week. A home debut in Indiana, maybe with Halliburton coming back, bring them back together. Regardless, exciting times in Indiana leading up to the All-Star game, which they're hosting. This is exciting times to be a Pacers fan there. I picked them to be an underdog at the beginning of the year, but they're gonna be dogging people in a bit here, you see. But yeah, we'll go to the Windy City, and the Bulls went 2-2 this past week, but they're mostly remembered for what happened during what was supposed to be a happy moment. During the game last Friday against the Golden State Warriors, the Bulls were honoring the legendary 95-96 Chicago team that went 72-10, won the NBA title. Bunch of former players there, former coaches. Worked nice. Steve Kerr was in town. You had the Warriors visiting the Bulls, right? So it was really cool, and I was excited to see it because I was just a pup when this was going on. This is what got me in the basketball. Why, when you throw something in the garbage, you go Jordan, and some people go Kobe, and it's all cool whenever you grow up. As long as you're shouting someone's name, throwing out your trash, it's all good. But I was really excited to see this. But as it was starting, it seemed kind of lackluster. They're announcing players. You're like, oh, cool, cool. And then they're like, Scottie Pippen. And he's not there. You're like, okay. Dennis Rodman. He's not there. You're like, oh, what is going on? Michael Jordan. And you're like, okay, is he there? No, he's not there, but he's got a video. Okay, he did a video. I guess that's something. Then they show Phil Jackson, who looked very happy and humbled, and they gave him a nice cheer. But then the disappointment came. They showed former GM Jerry Krause, and the crowd booed. They booed the picture of him, and we know Jerry Krause has passed. So they go to his widow, who was like, no. And like the whole thing just, it felt cringy to watch. You're like, is this really happening? I don't know. You're kind of questioning it. You're like, what the fuck just happened? After halftime, during the broadcast, Bulls announcer Stacey King ripped the fans for the embarrassing move. People on social media were picking up on it. I had to write notes because I keep notes for shit for this. I got sticky notes all around the computer, right? So do what you got to do. I had to keep notes on it. It's just mind-blowing. I would never expect something like this, this is an honor of one of the best teams ever to play, one of the best records. They had a 72-10 record and won the title, unlike Golden State's team, who got 73 wins but didn't win the title. But I don't know. It's just the hate Krause got from the Last Dance documentary, where they called them crumbs. He did want to blow up the team a bit and do something on his own, but you can't fault the man he built the team, right? The players had to do what they had to do, but he constructed, whether you like it or not, he was an integral part of that team. So to see that was rough. I tweeted out the only honor I'd compare this embarrassment to was when the Washington football team honored Sean Taylor with that, whatever kind of statue you want to call it. It was embarrassing. And I tweeted that at Justin Tinsley from Around the Horn. He retweeted it. I was like, oh, I was fangirling a bit. It was really cool. But back to the Bulls on the court. Karma hit them, and they lost that game against the Warriors there. But they bounced back and beat the Spurs before losing to that tough Cavs team I alluded to. And then they'd go into Toronto, and DeMar would play great in his old stomping grounds. Team's healthy now. They're very up and down. I still think it's a crowded kitchen at the point, but who's leaving the kitchen? Kobe White's emerged enough. I think you got to keep him. Zach LaVine, maybe he's getting moved before the deadline, but I'm thinking that's what you do. You keep Kobe White, you move LaVine, you stick with DeMar and Caruso and ride it out. They can do it in the East, but this is a tipping point in Chicago. Do you want to keep going in this season, or do you say, we're not just moving LaVine, we're moving DeMar, we're moving Caruso, let's blow it up? I don't know what they're going to do, But, the Bulls are going into LA to play the Lakers next Thursday. So that could be a potential tryout showcase to show the Lakers which players they could potentially acquire. But yeah, it's a lot of questioning in Chicago after that embarrassment at halftime. I still can't believe that happened. But we'll wrap up the Central here by going to the Detroit Pistons. And yeah, we can talk about what they did off the court first. The Pistons sent big man Marvin Bagley, the third, and wing player Isaiah Livers, and future draft considerations to the Wizards for Danilo Gallinari and Mike Muscala. Pistons get some brief veteran leadership as both guys are on expiring contracts, and they still may get moved before the deadline. But on the court, the Pistons went 1-2 this past week. Yes, they grabbed another W. They'd first lose a tight one to the Rockets, where Jaden Ivey had a chance to win it at the buzzer and missed. And they'd follow that up by going into Washington and beating the Wizards, the team they just literally traded with by double digits. Alec Burks, 34 points off the bench. We got to see more of rookie Oscar Thompson. Pistons would then stay in a battle with one of the best teams in the league, the Timberwolves, before losing. And the Pistons played those last few games without Cade Cunningham, who's still out with a knee injury. In his absence, Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren, they've really been balling out. And I feel like with those players I just mentioned, Ivey and Duren, their improved play, and the possible return of Cade Cunningham, and a little bit of more of a veteran presence following a trade, a little addition by subtraction because Stewart and Duren get a little more time. Maybe the Pistons are going to start reeling off some wins. I don't know. Maybe I'm a little crazy here, but the Bagley experiment clearly failed. And like I'm saying, this opens the door for Stewart and Duren to do a little more time, a little more damage together rather than splitting that time with Bagley. We'll see. I am optimistic for the Pistons. But we'll wrap up the Eastern Conference by going to the Southeast Division, starting with the division leading Miami Heat. They went 3-1 this past week, beating division foes Orlando and Charlotte before going into Brooklyn and winning in OT. Thanks to some clutch Jimmy Butler free throws in that one. They then go into Toronto and lose to an inspired Raptors club I alluded to earlier. But the Heat are getting healthy again, and they're starting to find their chemistry. It's good to see Jimmy Butler, Bam, Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry all healthy again. It's awesome. They look good on their 3-game winning streak before falling to the Toronto, but I'm excited to see what Miami does going forward. And keep watching Yami Yaquez Jr. The man is a stud, and he's in commercials with Jimmy Butler now. But we'll stay in Florida. We'll go to the Orlando Magic. They went 1-3 this past week. All 4 of those games are without Franz Wagner, who's still dealing with that ankle injury. The Magic lost that close one in Miami I just mentioned. They then go into Oklahoma City and lose that tough team. But they'd follow that up by going into Madison Square Garden and beating the Brunson-less Knicks. But they'd go into Atlanta and lose a tough one at the buzzer to the Hawks. And despite this tough week, it's nice to see Markelle Fultz back in the lineup. And the Magic, they're starting to get healthy. A few guys are getting back. A bit of a log jam now, so not a lot of minutes have been up for grabs. And Jamal Mosley, he's having looks like a tough time managing everyone. I think the biggest cure will be getting Franz Wagner back. Having him and Banchero their 1-2 punch will really open things up for everyone else. And Banchero's been doing pretty good on his own, holding down the fort, but I think they need Franz Wagner back to get back on winning ways. Next up in the Southeast, the Atlanta Hawks, been mentioned them a bit already. They went 2-2 this past week, getting trounced by the Halliburton-less Pacers. And even worse, they were beaten by 28 by the Washington Wizards. That Wizards loss must have woken them up a bit. They'd host the Spurs and pound them before winning at the buzzer at home against the Magic, which I just alluded to. And there's been lots of talk about DeJounte Murray. Is he getting traded? But his stock definitely skyrocketed with that buzzer-beating fadeaway against the Magic, and it was a nice clutch shot. And, it's kind of tough for Murray. He was on the trade block for a while in San Antonio before getting moved to Atlanta, where, again, he's now on the trade block. I know he's in the last year of his contract, and that's probably why the Hawks are hoping to get something back before he leaves, but maybe they should try to see it out and see how the season goes. But I think they've kind of given up on the year already, I don't think they've thought this Trae Young, DeJounte Murray thing has worked. So they might ship him off as a rental. Who's going to pick him up as a rental? Maybe the Lakers, the Sixers, the Heat. The Heat, I'm wearing the Heat jersey today. Or even the Knicks. Maybe they make another move after OG. I don't know if they would. They're looking pretty good, but I think a lot of those teams would be happy to have DeJounte Murray in the lineup for them. He just showed why, like I said, with that buzzer beater against the Magic. Next up, Charlotte Hornets. They were thrilled to get LaMelo back from injury against the Spurs. However, the losing trend continued. They went 0-3 this past week, owning the longest losing streak in the NBA at 6 games. LaMelo put up 28 points and 5 dimes in his return against the Spurs, but like I said, they still lost. They proceed to get blown out by the Heat and the Pelicans, so it's a tough go in Charlotte right now. Today they have a potential chance against winning against my Spurs, but then they got the Sixers and Timberwolves before getting another potential and winnable game against the Pistons. But we know what LaMelo's going to do. Rozier's been stepping up. Bridges has been consistent. Nick Richards has been trying to hold it down the middle, but I think they just need Mark Williams back. But he's got a back injury. We know how back injuries go. It's uncertain when he's coming back. And like Nick Richards is doing what he can in the middle, but they need a guy like Mark Williams in there. Like I said, he'll change the whole game. I thought he'd be back this week, but those back injuries, they're fickle beasts. We'll wrap up the division and the Eastern Conference when the American capital. Washington Wizards went 1-2 this past week, going into Atlanta and shocking the Hawks. They must have been feeling themselves a bit because they'd return home and lose to the Pistons, which not a lot of teams have done this year. Kind of karma for the Wizards, who mocked the Pistons during their historic losing streak. And Wizards would follow that up by going to Madison Square Garden and losing a close one to the Knicks. And Marvin Bagley's looked pretty good in his Wizards debut, despite that loss to the Knicks. You know, I just mentioned they picked him up from the Pistons, and he had a nice double-double with 20 points and 11 rebounds in the loss. Like I said, it was kind of overcrowded in that Pistons front court, so maybe this new beginning for the former number 2 overall pick. We thought the Pistons change of scenery from Golden State would transpire him into another court, an all-star kind of player. It hasn't yet. So maybe this new beginning in Washington with former teammate Jordan Poole, maybe they can connect a bit and make him live up to that number 2 overall pick. But say what you want about the Wizards. They're trying to shake things up despite all this mediocrity they've shown. But we're going to the Western Conference now. We'll go to the Northwest Division with the best team in the West, Minnesota Timberwolves. They went 4-0 this past week, rocking that 4-game winning streak. They beat the Trailblazers for beating a tough Clippers team. They go on the road and win on a closer game than you'd think over the Pistons before returning home and winning a game on TNT over a very depleted Grizzlies team. Anthony Edwards, he showed out on national TV, throwing an alley-oop off the backboard to himself, leading the game with 28 points. He's one of my favorite players to watch, and he needs to have his name in that MVP race as well. The Wolves have the best defensive rating in the NBA. They continue to show the league. They're the real deal. I can't get over the front court of Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid. I said it once and I said it again. It is the best front court in the league. And this West is tougher than ever, and Minnesota's leading that group. And I'll continue to shout out Chris Finch for Coach of the Year. No one seems to be wanting to give him that. Let's at least put his name in there. He's leading the West, you know? Next up in the division and in the conference, the Oklahoma City Thunder. They went 2-2 this past week, winning at home against the Magic before going to the City of Angels and losing 2 straight. First to the Lakers, where they could not contain Anthony Davis, and then they'd get out executed late by the veteran Clippers. They'd go into the Utah and end the Jazz's 6-game winning streak in a fantastic game. But despite those LA troubles, this team is still one of the best in the league. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander continues to lead the MVP race. I will get to that race at the end of this episode. But he's up there. Jalen J-Dub Williams out of Santa Clara. He's a legit scorer in this league now. He's developing more each game. Chet Holmgren, he kind of slowed down a bit this past week. I don't want to say he's hit a rookie wall, but his numbers aren't as good as they have been. And, you know, maybe that's what happens when you go up against Anthony Davis. He definitely looked like a rookie going up against him. But hey, this is the second youngest team in the league, and some nights it's going to show. Like against the Clippers. Down the stretch, the Clippers were making big plays. The crowd was in it, and I just never felt the Thunder could come back. And in every game, you're like, Thunder coming back. But I don't know, against the Clippers, it's just that they never felt like they were going to fully come back, which is kind of worrying. You don't want to see that in the playoffs, but as the second youngest team, it could happen. We'll see what happens. But it was good to see SGA get some love from the TNT crew. Much deserved. If you're not watching those teams, watch them. Got a good battle of those top 2 teams, like who I just mentioned here. On Saturday night, you'll have the Wolves. You'll have the Thunder. It'll be a good match. We'll stick with this division. And we'll stick with the trend of 1, 2, 3, the third team in the division and third team in the conference, the Denver Nuggets. Defending champs went 2-1 this past week, beating a tough Pelicans team in a great game. They then host the Pacers and beat a Halliburton-less Pacers team. Then it was a pretty awesome battle between big men, between Jokic and Embiid. I mentioned Embiid's huge numbers earlier, but Jokic was no slouch. He put up 25 points and 19 boards in the loss. The key was the 3 assists they held Jokic to. So the 76ers really clamped on Jokic's passing that game. But despite that loss to the Sixers, this Nuggets team, they're capable of going back to back. They look like they're capable of it. Jokic continues to put up MVP numbers. You got Porter Jr. doing his thing, Jamal Murray, Christian Braun off the bench, Reggie Jackson. The team is almost the same as last year. They're obviously missing key guys like Ish Smith, Jeff Green, and more importantly, Bruce Brown of the Raptors now. But this team, they're fun to watch. Friday night showdown. You got the Nuggets in Boston. Should be a classic. I'm looking forward to that one. Next in the Northwest Division, one of the hottest teams in the NBA. Everyone's talking about them now. The Utah Jazz are going 3-1 this past week, beating the Raptors by 32 before winning a shootout against the Lakers. They'd beat up on the Halliburton-less Pacers by 27, and then they had a game scheduled with the Warriors, but it was postponed after Warriors assistant coach Dejan Milojevic passed away from a heart attack, which I started the episode with. They then would host the Thunder, and it was a close one, but the Thunder would beat them and end their 6-game winning streak. And the loss ended their streak, but I see the Jazz bouncing back here. They are surprising a lot of people, but not this guy. You heard the Jazz getting love from me on previous episodes. I'm glad the rest of the world's caught up. This is a diverse team, not just the guys from different nationalities, but on the court. You know, they can hurt you in different ways. Lauri Markkanen, loving it. He should be in the All-Star game. And I'm sounding like a brokered record by beating this point here. But Jordan Clarkson moving to the bench. Huge move. He wants that 6th Man of the Year trophy now. He might as well. He's been moved to the bench. Might as well take that trophy. But the main thing is he's contributing to a winning team now. And that's what you want to see in Utah. Wrapping up the Northwest, we go to the Trailblazers. They went 1-2 this past week, losing by a pretty big margin to the tough Timberwolves before returning home and losing to the Suns. Despite that loss to the Suns, though, at least number 3 overall pick, Scoot Henderson, had one of his best games of his young career. He'd go for 33 points, 9 dimes, and 7 boards in the loss. The Blazers would then follow that up by winning a tight one over the Nets. Anthony Simons hit a go-ahead shot with less than a second to go to win that game. And they picked that win up despite not having DeAndre Ayton. He was slated to come back to the lineup, but he couldn't get to the arena because of the icy roads in his neighborhood. Apparently, the Trailblazers sent some people out to help him, but they couldn't get him there. I didn't realize the icy roads in Portland, but you don't see that very often on the did not play icy roads. It's very interesting, but this Portland team, they're either going to be in the game or they're getting blown out. It's not any in between, and I'm wondering if any of these vets will get moved before the deadline. And Jeremy Grant, Malcolm Brogdon, great players who on a title contending team could be the difference. And we'll leave the Northwest. We go to the Pacific. We'll start with the division-leading Clippers. They went 2-1 this past week, beating a depleted Grizzlies team in Memphis before going to Minnesota, losing to a tough Timberwolves team. They'd then return home and beat the Thunder. And, they have a nice little break. Their win over the Thunder was Tuesday the 16th, and their next game is until Saturday the 21st, so some nice little downtime in LA to relax, I guess. But this Clippers team, they're not relaxed on the court. Winners 8 of their last 10, looking like a real threat in the Western Conference. And like I said, a lot of people question that Harden deal. It's looking real good right now. Mason Plumlee's back in the lineup. He returned the starting lineup, had a big game. Kawhi Leonard's name, I had him in the MVP race a few episodes ago, but his plays dropped a bit, not because of negativity. It's because Paul George has elevated his game. He's been playing lights out. So if there's just passing the torch around on who's going to win each night, that might not win him MVP hardware, but that could result in a Larry O'Brien trophy. So we'll see. Next up in the division, the Sacramento Kings. They're in a bit of a slump this week, going 0-4, rocking a 4-game losing streak. They got beaten by the Embiid-less 76ers team when Tobias Harris went off. They'd follow that up by going into Milwaukee and losing that thrilling game to the Bucks where Dame Dollar made Dame time in overtime. And then go into Phoenix, and they were leading by 22 at one point, but they'd throw it away and lose by 2. Then they hosted a Pacers team who was out Halliburton, who was awaiting the arrival of Siakam, and they'd lose to them. It's wild. Like, Domantas Sabonis has had 3 triple doubles in the last 3 games. It looks like Kevin Huerter is finally finding his stroke. But they're losing. They're losing the games despite all that. And then Mike Brown lost some money because he was ejected in the fourth quarter, that loss to the Bucks for pursuing an official. But he didn't end it there. In the press conference, he busted out the laptop. He was showing off the video. They slapped him with a $50,000 fine. No one's grieving for him and the Kings, and they got some tough games coming up. So they better turn it around, or that losing streak's going to grow. Just behind the Kings in the Pacific, the Phoenix Suns, they went 2-0 in their spaced out schedule. Went into Portland and beat on the Trailblazers before returning home and coming back from that massive comeback to beat the Kings I just alluded to. The big three starting to get more time together. Booker, KD, and Beal, they're on a 3-game winning streak. KD's continuing to be the leading scorer on this team. But the biggest surprise out of the big three, Grayson Allen. Against the Kings, he was the only reason that team hung around before that big comeback. He had 29 points in that win. If he can keep up his great play and get some more time, he'll join elite company. Right now, he's the only qualified player averaging 50, 40, 90. That's 50% from the field, 40% from the three, 90 from the foul line. And yeah, this team's starting to develop more. They're coming together. Their schedule's ramping up a bit here after this break. They're going to New Orleans to take on the Pelicans before returning home, take on the Pacers and Bulls before going on the road again to take on the Mavericks. So this little 4-game stretch will be a nice barometer for the Suns. But we'll go back to LA. We'll talk Lakers. They went 2-1 this past week and sit at 500 on the season at 21-21. They drop one in Utah to the sizzling Jazz before returning home and beating 2 tough teams in the Thunder and Mavericks. The one thing you can hang your hat on this Lakers season has been Anthony Davis. Often scrutinized big man, he's silenced those haters this year. His numbers are great. 25.2 points per game, 12.2 rebounds per game, 3.7 assists, and 2.5 blocks. Like, he's doing it all right now. LeBron is astounding. What he's doing in his 21st season makes no sense. No one's ever done it. So, trend setting again. That's all this guy does. But the big difference the last few games has been those others, as Shaq said. Rui Hachimura has returned from injury, played some big minutes the last few games. Reeves has stepped up and started to look like that money that he's been given. But the big difference maker is D'Angelo Russell. If he plays like he did against the Mavericks, this team can be a title threat like I thought they'd be at the beginning of the season. Seems this is the time of the year where the Lakers kind of go on a little bit of a lull before ramping up. So we'll see if they'll start ramping it sooner. I'm not sure, but they're rocking a 2-game winning streak. They got games against the Nets and Trailblazers, winnable games for a big LA showdown with the Clippers on Tuesday. But we'll wrap up the division going to the Golden State Warriors, and man, it's been a tough go for the Warriors. As mentioned at the top of the episode, sudden passing of assistant coach Dejan Milojevic. It's already been a disappointing year for this team. Now this has to be crushing. Their game against the Jazz was postponed. There's a game today against the Mavericks that's postponed as well. You can tell from this team's reaction and the statements how much it's affecting them. To have a coach who becomes a friend, you're at a team private dinner, have a heart attack, rush to the hospital, you're all waiting, you're hoping for the best, only to get the worst. It's just devastating. Like, man, it really puts shit in perspective. Like, I don't know how the Warriors are going to bounce back from this in the immediate future, Before this tragedy, the Warriors beat the Bulls in that game that had the Chicago faithful booing a widow. Then you had the Warriors losing to the Bucks, and you follow that out by losing to a depleted Grizzlies team on national television. And that was with Draymond Green returning to the lineup from his suspension. And then you have this devastating moment happen. It's just a lot. Like, I can't imagine where their headspace is right now. Their next scheduled game is next Wednesday against the Hawks. I imagine there'll be a huge emotional tribute to honor a great man, but it's going to be tough putting your mind in the right place to play these games. I don't know how they're going to get through this adversity, but this is what makes you what you are, I guess. It's just brutal. We'll see some emotional basketball, I imagine, in the next bit from them. We'll go to the last division in my NBA recap, the Southwest, starting with the division-leading New Orleans Pelicans, who have the 5th best record in the Western Conference, because the top 3 teams are in the Northwest. The Pelicans went 2-2 this past week. They lose to the defending champs in the Mile High City, the Nuggets. They bounced back and beat the Mavericks without their big three. No Zion, no Ingram, no McCollum, no problem. 7 Pelicans hit double figures, and rookie Jordan Hawkins scored 34 off the bench to lead the Pels to the victory. They'd have a rematch with Dallas, and the Pelicans would have their big three back, but this time the Mavs would take it. Go figure. The Pelicans would take that Mavs loss out on the Hornets, beating them by 20, with Brandon Ingram having a nice triple-double. Pelicans have won 7 of their last 10, and they're starting to get even more bodies back. So we know what that big three can do with Zion, Ingram, and McCollum, but the rest of this team is awesome. They're long, they hustle, they play every possession like it's their last. They're sitting 7th in the league in defensive rating, which is pretty good. This team just has random drop-offs, really. It seems like their biggest enemy is themselves, because when they're cooking, they're fun to watch. And just behind the Pelicans in the Southwest is the Mavericks. They went 1-2 this past week. I mentioned those games. They split with the Pelicans. Then they go to LA and lose to the Lakers. Doncic didn't suit up for those Pelicans game, and it was the Kyrie Irving show. I've mentioned in other episodes how beautiful his game is to watch when he's going. It's unreal. He's got the ball on his hands like a yo-yo, and his finishing, it's unreal. I love watching it. And I got to shout out Tim Hardaway Jr. too. He's hurting his 6th man of the year chances by starting these games, but he's had to due to roster depletages. But he's been lighting it up, putting up 24 and 41 in back-to-back games against the Pelicans. Luka returned in that game against the Lakers and put up big numbers, but the rest of the Mavs didn't, and they kind of struggled. I think the Mavs just need to get back on track with bodies out there. Like, they have Hardaway Jr. in the starting lineup. That's affecting the second unit because you're lacking that punch, really, right? But Dante Exum, he's been dealing with injury, and that's kind of affecting things too, a little trickle-down effect. Hopefully they can get those guys healthy again. They had their game against the Warriors postponed, and then their next games will be against the Celtics and Suns, so we'll see how they hold up in those games. Next up in the Southwest, Houston Rockets. They went 1-3 this past week, struggling in some games. They barely escaped with a win over the Pistons in Detroit, and then they got blown out by the Celtics, as I mentioned at the top of the show. Rockets would continue to lose the Eastern competition, dropping a game in Philly and then in New York against the Knicks. It's a young team. They're kind of overachieving a bit this year. You know, they're having a tough go, losing 6 of their last 10, but still young. They got veteran point guard Fred VanVleet, who's been trying to steady the ship. He's been playing well the last few games. And, you know, they'll weather the storm. They'll go through struggles, as they're going to do as a young team. But you got to credit Ime Udoka. He's done a great job. This team's deep, young, talent. You know, got to keep everyone happy. You got to put the minutes out there. Their next 3 games at home against the Jazz, Celtics, and Blazers, so things aren't getting any easier for the Rockets. Sengun's pushing for that all-star nod, and Jalen Green, he's stepped up as of late. But we'll go to Memphis next. Grizzlies went 1-3 this past week. They started by losing to the Clippers, and they'd lose more than just a game. Team already riddled with injuries would lose another. Desmond Bane, who's been having a great season, injured his ankle, and he'll miss the next 6 weeks. Tough blow to a team that's already taken a lot of them this season. They'd follow that loss up with a loss to the Knicks. But then, like I said in the Warriors part, they'd bounce back and they'd beat the Warriors on national television, spoiling Draymond Green's return. And surprising the whole country, really. Leading scorer Vince Williams with 24, and G.G. Jackson coming off the bench to score 23 in that win. It was awesome seeing Jackson getting interviewed by Shaq after the game. He's the youngest player in the league, and you could see him lighting up, getting the attention. They'd follow that up by going into Minnesota, again on national television, and losing a close one to that tough team. Jaren Jackson Jr. is the only face you probably recognize out there. Vince Williams has stepped his game up with extended time. It's good seeing Santi Aldama, the Spanish national, getting some good minutes, but it appears to be a lost season for the Grizzlies. At least you got to respect they're leaving it out there every night. We'll wrap up the team recaps by going to San Antonio, talk about my Spurs. They went 1-3 this past week, thrashing the Hornets by 36. Wemby would sit the next games, and the Spurs would still be in it in the game against the Bulls before coming up short. The Spurs would go on the road and lose to the Hawks and Celtics, and Wembanyama's still on that minutes restriction, which is kind of a bummer to see, but he's still putting up huge numbers despite it. He must have sent Chet Holmgren's down week and elevated his game to try to get back in that Rookie of the Year race. The last 3 games Wemby played this past week against the Hornets, 26 points, 11 boards, 2 2 blocks. Against the Hawks, 26 points, 13 boards, 5 blocks. Against the Celtics, 27 points, only 5 boards and 1 block. But, man, the number one overall pick, leading the team in scoring at 19.8 a game, rebounding 10.1 a game, and leading the league in blocks at 3.1. This team, it's taken their lumps, but I'm loving watching Wemby play. Like I said, I wish he wasn't on a limit restriction, but it's better than him not being out there at all. But that's the team recaps, y'all. How's your team licking? How is your team taking a licking? Mine's a bit. But am I hating on your team too much and not giving them enough love? Let me know. I'm loving Wembanyama's development. We'll see where the rest of the season goes for them. We'll go to the stat leaders, starting with the NBA's leading scorer, Philadelphia's Joel Embiid, leading the league at 35.1 per game. That's crazy. Other players averaging over 30. Dallas's Luka Doncic at 33.6. Milwaukee's Giannis Antetokounmpo at 31.2, and Oklahoma City's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at 31 per game. Our rebounding leader, Domantas Sabonis at 12.6. Just behind him is Minnesota's Rudy Gobert at 12.4. Lakers' Anthony Davis at 12.2. Jokic at 11.9. And Embiid at 11.6. Assist leader still Tyrese Halliburton. I guess he hasn't played. He's been injured, but he's still at 12.5, leading the league. Just behind him, Atlanta's Trae Young at 10.9. And just under the double-digit mark, you got Luka Doncic at 9.2 and Denver's Jokic with 9.1. On the defensive side, steals leader still OKC's SGA with 2.2. But Donovan Mitchell, he slithered up there, and he's up to 2 per game himself. I mentioned the Spurs' lengthy rookie Victor Wembanyama leading the lead in blocks at 3.1. Milwaukee's Brook Lopez just behind him at 2.9. Utah's Walker Kessler is getting 2.6 blocks per bench off the bench. Blocks per game off the bench. Yikes. And then fellow rookie Chet Holmgren, he's tied with Anthony Davis at 2.5 blocks per game. We'll talk team stuff now. Rencity top 5. The top 5 best teams in the league, according to yours truly. Bit of a change, except for that number 1 spot, which hasn't changed in a long time. So, number 1, Boston Celtics. Number 2, Minnesota Timberwolves. Number 3, Denver Nuggets. 4, Oklahoma City Thunder. And 5, the Philadelphia 76ers. So as you can see, the Celtics stay atop the Rencity top 5. They're currently on a 3-game winning streak and look like the best threat to win the title. That starting 5 is the best in the league. I still stand by that. A little bit of shuffling below them. The Timberwolves went from 4th to 2nd following their 4-game winning streak. Nuggets sit just above the Thunder. Nuggets went 2-1 this past week. Thunder went 1-2. Sixers get back into the top 5, replacing the Bucks because Embiid came back and showed off. That's what's up. Back to individual trophy talk. That popular MVP race is still buzzing with candidates. I still have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of Oklahoma City leading the race, but man, Joel Embiid is just behind him. It might suck because he might not have enough games to qualify, but what he does when he's on the floor is something else. And then I have a tier just below those guys. I have Boston's Tatum, Dallas's Luka Doncic, Denver's Jokic, Minnesota's Anthony Edwards, Milwaukee's Giannis Antetokounmpo. For Rookie of the Year, like I said, I had Chet Holmgren having a little bit of a down week. Before that, I had him a clear lead in this race. But Wembanyama stepped up, Holmgren dropped down a bit, and now they're long neck and long neck. So we'll see what happens. We have a guy contributing decent numbers on a winning team or a guy leading his team with numbers. It'll be a tight race right down to the finish, and I'll continue to shout out Miami's Yama Yaquez Jr. for his play, and it's great to see rookie pogo stick Derek Lively back in the lineup for the Mavs. For a hot second there against the Lakers, they were going dunk for dunk, him and Davis. It was really cool to see. And I mentioned some other trophies last season because we're near the halfway part, so let's continue that. Coach of the Year, tight race. I got to still have the guy leading the Western Conference out of nowhere, Chris Finch. He's got to be leading that. And I got to say, I haven't given much love to this guy, but I've given love to his team and to his main player. But Joe Mazzulla, I got to give him love, coach of the Celtics. He's got the team with the best record in the league, so he deserves some respect there. And, people expected his team to be good, but being expected to do something and actually doing it are two different things, right? So he needs love. I got to talk about the Oklahoma City's Mark Daigneault. having a great year. My pick at the beginning of the season, Rick Carlisle, the Pacers. I think he still should be in here. Houston's Udoka. He's having a fantastic season. No one expected Houston to do what they're doing. And I mentioned it earlier, but Cleveland's JB Bickerstaff. He's in the race as well. Sixth man of the year. I've been talking all year how it was a Malik Monk of the Kings and Tim Hardaway Jr. of the Mavs. Like I said, though, Hardaway Jr.'s had to start a few games due to injuries on his team. Karis LeVert's continuing great play for a hot Cavs team. And Jordan Clarkson on one of the hottest teams in the league as well, the Utah Jazz. Since moving to the bench, he's in that contest. So we got a better race there, a few more contestants. Most improved player, it's still going to be a tough one. My two favorites that I want, I don't know if they'll get it, but Chicago's Kobe White and Atlanta's Jalen Johnson, because they are the two bigger surprises of this group. Because the rest of the group, Philly's Tyrese Maxey, Toronto's Scotty Barnes, Houston's Alperen Sengun, these guys I already think were in that category. I don't think we can give most improved to these guys that were already there. The numbers, I guess, are looking better, and the numbers don't lie, but man, they're playing some good ball. And my preseason pick was Benedict Mathurin of the Pacers. He's looked great as of late, but I don't think enough to usurp those guys in the race. But hey, episode 12 in the books, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Learned some hoops, loved some hoops, questioned some hoops. But hey, some great basketball has been getting played. Some guys returning from injuries. By the time the next episode ends, we'll know who our all-star starters are. Big matchup, showdowns of some young guns. Like I said, tell people you'll love them. Life's weird. You'll never know when the last time you'll get to say that is. Spread love, not hate, and hold that follow through in your jump shot. Thanks for coming out, guys. Rencity out.